What's up, guys, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today I'm showing you what went into the making of my latest song. This is Captiva. This is a liquid drum and bass track, and I'm going to go into especially this main section that I'm about to play for you here. So I'm going to play that, then build it up piece by piece, then go into some of the individual elements. And at the end, I'll end up talking about a bit of the vocal mixing. So let's kick that off here. So let's start off with the drums here. We've got a kick and a snare. Pretty self-explanatory, and these are both pretty short and punchy because this is going pretty fast. We're at 170 BPM, so I need everything to be able to be very short, very clear, so that I don't get mud, I don't get stuff overlapping or piling up. And by the way, this snare was made from a bunch of layering of a bunch of different snares. I did that in a previous session file, so I'll actually leave a download link in the description so you can download that snare for free to use however you want. So we got that once again. Let's talk about this break. This break here, and I can go over to a more normal version of this. That's how the break sounded originally, and actually I use it in this form with a bunch of filtering in the intro. Then I cut it up, built it into the new pattern. So I actually have the pattern switch in the middle of the song to keep everything nice and interesting. So that's what you get here. Except the other thing that I'm doing is pumping it with LFO tool. So let me reduce this so you can hear what it sounds like now. So that's your basic break. Then if I had the kick and snare without LFO tool, you hear how it doesn't sound very clear? The kick and snare kind of fight with each other. So I'm going to go ahead and make LFO tool actually do some work again, and you can hear the difference. So now basically the break is just providing the cymbals and the hi-hat. It's not really doing any work beyond that because I don't want the kicks and the snares to fight. I want that to be very clear, very punchy, and that's going to be kind of a theme here. So that's kind of how this goes for most of the song. Let's go into some bass. Come on. And this bass, admittedly, is a preset, but I think there's still some useful stuff I can talk about from this. So once again, let me disengage LFO tool. You can do all the same stuff with just run-of-the-mill sidechain compression, but I like LFO tool because of the control it gives me. I can be really precise in exactly how much I duck stuff. So here's the bass. It's a serum patch. Got it from this pack here. Got some effects on here. So nothing too complicated. And as you can see and hear, it's rhythmically pulsing. And that's another thing that's really nice to add some interest to this section. The fact that there's a bit of movement there, and that's really nice. Drive it forward. Which is enhanced further by LFO tool, which I believe kicks in every time that there's either a kick or a snare. Yeah. And one thing to notice here too is that little octave jump. Very common thing in liquid drum and bass because it sounds cool. And I do it even more extremely in this other section with the vocals. Let me go ahead and mute the vocals for now, but I really like that effect. It's something else that helps keep everything nice and interesting. So back to this main section. Here, that's our drums and bass, and if I play that all by itself, it's pretty full just on its own, and this was very intentional. I spent a bunch of time on the drums and the bass because this is drum and bass after all, and really I could just throw a vocal or a couple of pads on top of that and I'd be good to go. And a lot of production in liquid drum and bass tends to be a little more minimalist in nature, and obviously makes it easier to mix and just gets that certain sound. So moving on, speaking of pads, let's look at the pads. I have two elements for the pads here, these strings here. Definitely hear my Sigma influence there. And then this synth pad here. It's a retro synth patch. Come on, buddy. I believe in you. Here we go. And you see the filter envelope is moving a bit, so you get a bit of movement in the synth that kind of swells every time a chord hits. So all that together. And these are both providing some width that the drums and bass are not. So if I play that with just the drums and bass, here it fills everything out really nicely. You get some width, you get some high end, and some ambience, and that's a good time. So then beyond that, we've got the two kind of lead elements. You got the ARP and then the actual lead itself. So let's do the ARP real quick, save the lead for the end here. We've got this little staccato violin. And then the guy that's clearly doing most of the heavy lifting. And you hear how that's got some attack to it to make sure it cuts through the mix. And then the violins are there to kind of make it sound a little more organic, a little more interesting, kind of fill it out a bit. Hear the difference that makes there. And I've also got a bit of glide on that main ARP as well. And then finally the lead. And the lead is 3 layers. So I'll play those all together. So first of all, the one that's doing most of the work is this one right here. Go to the beginning here. That's got that really, really defined pluck at the beginning. And then it's got some nice sustain to it. And these notes are like held down the whole time. And then this one I have labeled magical for obvious reason. Adding some nice shimmer, some shine, some kind of ethereal element, some reverb, that kind of thing. And what I've done here as well is I have it at 2 octaves, so except the higher octave is just very subtle. The velocity is much lower on the higher octave than on the lower octave because I don't want it to hurt your ears. I don't want it to be so piercing that it actually causes physical pain. I just want it to really sit on top of everything else and really add some extra high end. And then finally, this element that's layered in really quietly. And I put this here because both of these other elements, these kind of plucked elements, they have a sustain to them, but it does taper off. But I wanted that note to always be playing constantly, and so this just kind of drones on in the background. So that keeps playing as the others start dropping off a little bit. And that just fills it out, makes sure that it's always there. It doesn't leave really any empty space. And boom, you've got your full drop. And so the other thing I wanted to talk about is the vocal section, or one of the vocal sections. And that's this section here. So I'll go from this little fill here and move forward. big thing that I did when mixing was actually not a vocal mixing thing at all, but it was in the composition, making sure that I left room for the vocal. So if I go ahead and mute it, you can hear the pads, but they're not taking up too much upper mids. You definitely hear the bass and the drums very clearly because they're kind of occupying their own space. And then the arp, I don't have it layered with the staccato violin until later, so it's just kind of sitting there by itself. Once again, pushing it to the background so that the vocal can take center stage. There's this nice just gap up in the upper mids where the vocal can just kind of sit on top of everything, float over the top of everything. So I don't really have to do any like ninja mixing tricks to get it to fit because I very intentionally designed the instrumental to fit the vocal. And that was before the vocal was even recorded, but I knew that it would be there and I knew that it would be a female voice, and so I designed the song accordingly. So real quick to solo the vocal, because I did do some processing on this.
Slipping out too far. I've never been so sure.
It's 2 layers. I've chopped this out so I can just easily switch back and forth between volumes. I wanted the harmony to be just a little quieter than that little echo element. And the processing on here is not all that complicated. We've got some EQ that's boosting the highs a little bit, cutting some kind of nasty stuff up in the upper mids, and then cutting a bunch of lows once again to make sure that it fits and soars over the top of everything else. A compressor just to even out everything, and that's only doing just a little bit of work.
I've never been so.
Keep everything nice and even. And then finally, there's stuff for your actual space. Put it in a room here. Some nice reverb, so let me mute this delay.
Slipping out too far.
That's nice, but the delay is what really brings it to life for me.
Slipping out too far.
Kind of this slap back delay, and I'll pull up that so you can see what my settings are. So when you compare that, or when you pair that with the reverb, you end up with
Slipping out too far.
and you have this nice ringing out, but I've made sure to cut all the low end of that reverb and that delay to make sure that it doesn't muddy up my mix. And as you can see, this is all being processed as a bus, and then I just have a little bit of EQs on the individual vocals. And I have a bunch of these layers because I wanted to be able to have maximum control over volumes and different processing for different sections of the song. All right, that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, I'd love to have you hit that like button and subscribe. I'm putting out a new video twice a week for the duration of the summer, so I will see you guys on Monday. Peace! Okay, that was a mistake. Don't tip your chairs, kids.